Sweet.
You want to say
Oh, we're
hi?
live.
We're
Are we
live.
live now?
Yes,
Oh,
we
hi.
are. It says,
Hey.
hello.
Hey. Hello, everyone. On Facebook, on my Facebook page, on our podcast Facebook page, and on YouTube. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Nice to see all of you again, and welcome to On the Inside podcast. This is where myself and Nico and Emery come together. We're going to discuss a few emotions, I suppose, over the next few weeks. And the topic we are going to talk about in our second episode is self-love, right? Nico, you want to say hi to everyone?
Yeah, hello, everyone. What I want to say about me, as for those of you who haven't watched the first episode, so I'm based in France, and then I teach meditation and I provide inner guidance to people who are, let's say, spiritual but not religious. So that's my background, and I also have a background in psychology research. Yeah, so I'll tap on that also in those conversations. Yeah.
Emery, say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm a clinical psychologist. I feel like I repeated this in like all of your shows, Sean. So, yeah, and I help people find themselves. Find different ways to make their lives better. I mean, it's really hard to summarize what I do in a nutshell. So yeah, not especially not at 11 p.m. Right? So yeah, it's nice to have everyone join us for our little chat today.
Yeah, and I think the three of us are largely in the helping profession, and as we try to enrich another person's life through our own expertise and our work, it's especially important that we put a little bit of focus on ourselves, right? Because there's this tendency that we always want to help people, but we forget about taking care of ourselves. And that's where this topic of self-love actually comes in, right? So I'm going to ask the clinical psychologist first. So when you think of self-love, right, like what actually comes to your mind? And I mean, it doesn't have to be a formal definition, but what comes to your mind when you think of self-love?
Right. I mean, it's so basic, but I think it's such a big thing as well in today's climate, especially. And I think when you think about self love, you think about self compassion, you think about self care. I think a lot of times we use these terms interchangeably, and it's so important in our helping profession because you know, I think if we're not careful, sometimes we neglect ourselves, in a bit to serve others, in order to help more people. I think it's so easy to get burnt out in the process if we don't put enough time and effort to actually practice self-care. Yeah, so that's how I see self-love.
Mm-hmm. Nico, what comes to your mind when you think of self-love or self-care?
Yeah, so in the I suppose in the spiritual traditions, so there's some people say, well, there's this kind of goal to cultivate like maybe love and compassion for like everything around us, like our friends, our family, animals, nature, so extending. So for a lot of people see that kind of like spiritual development, I suppose, as being about extending the capacity for inclusion, caring, and love to other things around us. But I feel that that compassion or love really is incomplete if it doesn't include ourselves as well. Because we're part of the world as much as everything that's outside, and so there's a need, I think, for a genuine kind of development, like even spiritual or personal development, to include ourselves as much as others in our ability to care. I think, yeah.
Actually, the way that I think about self-love is pretty simple, right? Just taking care of myself, making sure that I can last the long run, And I mean, I think of it in terms of why it's important to me. And, sometimes we always say you take care of yourself before you take care of others. Important that I do things that make sure I'm in the best possible shape and the best possible condition to do that. And of course, you want to prevent things like burnout and exhaustion. Have you guys experienced burnout before, like in your careers?
Of course.
What was it like?
Terrible. Yeah. I mean, it felt really difficult because, I mean, in our work, it's so important to show up 100% and be fully present. And when you're burned out, sometimes it creeps up on you. You don't even realize until you actually, are in it. And you feel so bad that you can't be 100%, right? You're not just burned out, but you feel guilty about being burned out. And as a result, it's even harder to take that pause. So it's so important to recognize, the signs before you get there. And yeah, to really run the mile, you really have to fuel up. You have to have little pit stops in order to go for a longer journey. So yeah, definitely, it's so prevalent in our profession.
Nico, ever burned out before?
Yeah, yeah, I have. I mean, I've done a PhD, so there's plenty of opportunities to burn out throughout the PhD. For those who don't know, I mean, who have no experience, who don't know anyone who's been through that, yeah, that's pretty demanding. Thing takes up a lot of your time, just because, I mean, you're just very interested in it, and you're very invested, and you care a lot, very much engaged. So it's pretty easy for your life to kind of become all centered around your PhD with no space, even for close friends and everything. So it just takes up so much of your life. And so if it does take up so much of your life, then there's even less space for yourself. I think when there's no space for your friends, there won't be really space for yourself.
Isn't that the consequence of being?
Yeah.
Isn't that the consequence of being very focused on something? And isn't focus a good thing?
Yeah. So for me, so my experience was that for me personally, that was really having that sense of single goal I wanted to achieve. And so I really put all my all my juices, all my excitement into that one goal. And it's also has a lot of rewarding aspects. Like that's where the trap is. I mean, you do a work that you find rewarding. That's also something that's true in helping professions. I mean, it's rewarding to help people. And so often I noticed, I mean, for me, it was that rewarding aspect that was also the trap, meaning you put in efforts and you put no limit on the efforts you put in, and then you get reward in proportion, but then you forget yourself in the process. And because the issue is there's really not much immediate reward in caring for yourself.
I totally agree.
We really very much right?
Yeah,
I feel
I
you
can
really much
resonate.
focus on external rewards as opposed to things that should be coming from. But I don't know why. It's a good question. Actually, why are there so little rewards for caring for ourselves?
Well, I mean, you just said
case,
that, right? You said a keyword, passion, and I think we're all very passionate in what we do, and sometimes in singularly pursuing that passion with that focus and drive, it's almost like nothing else quite matters, and we forget that we actually do matter as well, because all our attention is really on that one pursuit to really follow that passion and drive.
Yeah, and I think it's like, for me, I know that it's tough. I know that especially when you're on a project, there are going to be plenty of sleepless nights. But one of the things that I feel kind of drives me is it's a bit of FOMO, right? It's a bit of regret. Like I always tell myself that I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of whatever I have right now, health or love or care for myself, sleep a little bit less, because in 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, I don't really want to look back and say I didn't try hard enough. Right? And it's always this balance where it's this. You always tell ourselves, right? There is a sacrifice to achieve something. And especially if we are in entrepreneurship and you start your own businesses, there has to be a sacrifice, right? And that's where you kind of lose sight of self-love, self-care. Sleeping is now secondary, yeah.
So then I'm wondering that is there the sense that if you feel like you're not sacrificing enough, like it could be the case that maybe if you spend time for self-care, you have that sense that you're failing somehow. That's why you might not be doing it as much as you should. Meaning like my idea being like, oh, if I'm thinking like 2 hours off like in my day because I feel tired, instead of like working harder, like there's this kind of voice that says, oh, you're gonna be failing. Why are you doing that?
Like a sense of guilt.
Others are catching up. This kind of pressure to of not doing enough. That you know what I mean? I don't know.
Part of it is you ask yourself, right, in terms of being productive, in terms of having to be able to move at speed. In that time that I take to chill and relax, what else could I have got done? Like, could I have cleared a whole chunk of admin that I absolutely hate to do, but I got to do it anyway? Or could I have gained a little bit more insight in whatever field of work I'm trying to pursue? Correct? And it feels like you have to give up something in order to gain that productivity. And when you ask, what is in your control to give up at this point, then that just seems to be self-love or self-care. Yeah. I mean, Emery, you do a lot of that, right?
I hear this so much from my clients, right? Kids, teenagers, adults. And oftentimes there is this sense that, I should be doing something. I should be productive, right? Self-care is frivolous. Self-love is frivolous. In the 2 hours I take for a nap, I could have, done like 2 more things on my checklist, right? And then they beat themselves up for actually taking a break. And then I also hear from a lot of people this idea that self-love is selfish. You shouldn't be taking care of yourself because it's a bad thing. And, there's so many sort of unhelpful beliefs surrounding this idea of self-care. Yeah.
Well, before we carry on, I just want to take this time to thank the 8 people who are watching us right now. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello.
Hi.
It's so nice to see all of you. Justin says hi from Facebook. Hello, Justin. Worked with Justin on a project before, and Raymond is a fellow healthcare professional. And he says the 4 burners theory. What is the 4 burners theory? Anyone's familiar?
No.
Nope.
Nope. Raymond, why not? You want to come and tell us what the 4 burners theory is about? And we're going to carry on, right? I mean, just now Emery mentioned that self-love is selfish. What does that actually mean, right? Why would it be considered selfish?
So Emery didn't say that self-love is selfish, right? Self-love is definitely not selfish, okay? But a lot of people seem to believe that, it's synonymous with being selfish, right? Taking care of yourself is very self-centered. It's not a good thing, right? And there is a lot of guilt surrounding this idea of taking care of yourself first, right? Because they probably, in their whole lives had been putting others first. And so it's very uncomfortable for these individuals to be having this idea of self-care. And all the more we need to be sort of dispelling the myth, right, that, self-care is selfish, because really to help others, like Sean, what you said earlier, you need to fill up your own tank so that you have more to give for the longer run.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about this thing, right? So has there been a point in time where you've felt like, right now I need to do something for myself, right? Was there like a moment in time where you decided that, okay, I've worked hard, but it's enough, right? I want to do something else for myself. Anyone had that experience before?
I have, but I feel it's more in moments. Like for me, it really shows up in moments. Like for instance, if I've been working hard like throughout the week, and then a number of things that just don't seem to go right one day. Like I remember one day I was moving, and I didn't realize, but I spent like a lot of energy moving. managing the move. So I had a flatmate, but I felt like I was pulling a lot of the weight. And I just wasn't realizing it. And then I moved in, I set up my stuff, and I was so exhausted that I was, things starting to, I was forgetting to plan things that, I should have been planning. And then I remember the moments that was really striking for me was like, as I was unpacking things, I put a pottery that I really like, one of the stuff one of the piece of furniture, and then I knocked into it just because I was so exhausted, and I broke it, and it just broke my heart. And I was like, okay, so here we have a problem, right? So it's like, but it was almost, so see how late, I had a moment of pause. I was like, that makes no sense. Like, what, it's just, I could have avoided it. It was just clearly exhaustion, the reason of it. And I was like, okay, so we need to slow down. And then I took steps to take care of it. But they give you a sense of, like, at least for me, like the level of exhaustion I had to go through before I got some signals that there's an issue. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how common that is, and whether, no, I have strategies to check in regularly to make sense I don't get there. Mm-hmm. But in those moments, those kind of wake-up calls, that was a small one. I mean, people have, probably got into much more serious issue because of exhaustion and burnout.
Yeah.
But I feel it's always the small signals that we tend to ignore sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar for me, right? Like when I kind of realized that I need to do something for myself, a lot of my work is centered on helping other people, helping the community, helping our youth cope with mental health. But I think the first time I realized that taking care of myself is important is when I was working in the pharmacy, right? So for anyone who's been in healthcare, or especially in pharmacy, you would know that the workload can be pretty crazy, and I think there was once where it was probably my experience of burnout, right? Like it's not so much a physical exhaustion, but just mentally you're not there. And I feel so horrible when a patient comes to see me and they are so excited, and they are more excited to see me than I am to see them. But yet I have a job to do, and I genuinely care for them. I want to provide the best experience, but there's so much inertia. And I realized at some point in time, I wake up in the morning and like, I don't really want to go to work today. And that feels like crap, especially when one of the things that's very important to me is in any little way trying to make a difference in someone's life, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's only when things like that happen, then I realized that, okay, I need to take a break. I need some kind of rest. Previously, when my first 2-3 years of my career, I was working on a squash academy with my coach. So what happened was in the pharmacy, it's a 6-day work week, right? And every 4 weeks, we have to work about 11, 12-hour shift on the Sunday. On the Sundays that I'm not working, I would go and coach the little kids on squash. Yeah, and after 2 years, I realized that I've never actually taken a break for 2 years. And sometimes it's only when you stop that you realize how exhausted you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Amerie, is there a time for you where you suddenly realize the importance of self-love in your life?
I think every day after work, it's important for me to take that pause. I mean, look, I haven't had a proper break for maybe more than a year now. I work, maybe 7 days a week, I would say. And if I'm lucky, I get half a day off, where I could just recharge. And so I think this idea of, self-care and self-love, not beating myself up after a long day, just really giving myself a pocket of time to just rest my mind, recharge. It's so crucial for me to keep going. Yeah, so I would say, every day would be, a signal to practice that.
And considering that you literally work like 7 days a week, I mean, I know that you do go for some fitness sessions, 1-2 hours each time. You try to take care of yourself. Today, you haven't had your fitness session yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. But there's still time.
Yeah, maybe after this.
When you think of your workload, do you find that half a day is actually enough for you? And of course, that leads on to the other question: how much is enough?
Yeah. I don't know if there's a good answer to that. I mean, I think it's just really, I mean, it's never going to be enough, right? We always want more rest, right? But for me, I think it's important to have these little breaks to recharge me. Um, I mean, what I could say is that without these little pockets, I will not be able to function for this long. Um, and one of the hardest lessons I learned in this whole process of having my own practice is, really having to set boundaries. And actually, I'm very lucky because I have friends who help me keep that sort of in check. So every time, I'm like, should I just maybe bend over backwards, do a little bit more? I have really good, fierce, protective friends who would go, no. And then I'll be like, okay, all right, I guess you're right. I should just really take a bit of a break. So those little things help.
Mm. All right. One of the things you mentioned that was critical is setting boundaries, right? Because setting boundaries is one of the best ways to take care of yourself. Um, Nico, have you had like the experience of having to set boundaries?
I'm I have, but I tend to do it like I think there's many different strategies to set boundaries, and often I'm to give you a bit of a context. So I was in academia, and typically people do things a bit differently. Sometimes academia, and so if you send an email to someone asking for help or asking for a favor, and you're not getting a reply within a week, it's a no. So, and I think that's a good strategy because I think it's an area where people tend to work a lot first. I mean, there's a lot of work, and people get that there's this kind of system where you're like, okay, I get it, like it's busy, and so you don't actually have to go up to the person, have a whole conversation about why you won't be doing it. And you can, if you want to, sometimes when there's someone you really owe someone to something to, and you just cannot do it at that time. But so there's this kind of like I suppose more passive way of setting boundaries. So it's yeah. So I tend to use that strategy sometimes, or sometimes I just say no. But I think it's well, you mentioned that the thing that came up was that I think it's not a natural thing to do for us, and that's something that I find always fascinating. Like to me, I mean, I think we humans are just basically designed for like self-sacrifice for the group, like at least most of us, like the vast majority of us. And I think we have that thing programmed inside of us that it's really the group first, and our needs really come second. And I think that's why it's so hard also to set those boundaries, because it's almost like a very deep-seated, almost like biological programmation that we have to really not prioritize our need at all with respect to our friends, family, and work needs. And that takes a huge I feel like almost work on oneself to learn how to do that. I mean, to me, it's really like a long process, and it still is. Yeah.
Amerie, you have a lot of clients. You have a lot of clients who need you. They need your expertise. They need your care. Boundaries must be something that you try to set very commonly, very often.
Yes, boundaries is something I struggle with because, well, it's hard to say no, right? I mean, Nico, just kind of also talked about that. And yeah, but at the same time, it's important and it's healthy to do that. And, we want to model that for our clients as well. So it's an important practice that we need to keep sort of, going with, right? And I mean, as you guys were talking earlier, I was just thinking about, how self-love goes beyond just self-care, right? Self-love also, I think there is also a dimension of, really being accepting or okay with ourselves when we mess up, right? And I mean, it's this idea of self acceptance as well, and to be all embracing and, you know, um, give ourselves a bit of kindness, right? Even when, we had a bad day, right? We made a bit of a mistake. Yeah. And so I think it really goes beyond this idea of just self care and boundaries, but also one step further to kind of be good to ourselves, especially on a rough day.
And when you think about being good to yourself, do you feel like we don't appreciate ourselves enough?
I think as a collective, we could use, a bit more help with appreciating ourselves
What does that
as
mean?
individuals. Well, the thing is, I see a lot of people struggling with that. I think, I see so many people like beating themselves up so easily, right? And, I think even though people don't really talk about it, there is often this sense of shame that we hold about ourselves in some way. Shame might not be like, oh, I'm so ashamed of myself. It wouldn't be so apparent like that, but it could be even things like, oh, I feel embarrassed easily, or I don't want to show, this part of me because I'm afraid someone will reject it. I'm afraid that people might think I'm a fraud or an imposter, things like that. Yeah. So I think, yes, we could all use a bit more self appreciation, as opposed to, beating ourselves up so easily. Yeah, as a collective, we tend to do that. Yes.
Nico, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, so you mentioned shame and that kind of like, something that goes with that kind of worthlessness, that sense that you need to be doing more to have the right to just maybe exist or be included in a group, like at your workplace, like that kind of like looming cloud of like, I'm going to be rejected if I don't, show up that much and so on. I think it's always kind of there. But I feel there's almost that sense of like, but this to me needs to be included as well, in a sense. You still in the you still in shame and in self judgment if you judge the shame. You get what I mean? Like it's because then you get in the endless loop, because I feel like I really suck because I wasn't able to set that boundary. I shouldn't be like, feel pressure to do that much work, but you do, right? So you have to also care for the fact that there's that shame. You cannot just have, that kind of hate for your shame, because it's really almost hating yourself. And I think that awareness is it's that's why it's so challenging, because we always, even when we feel we're on the way to healing, in a sense like, oh, I've done some work on myself, I know I experience shame, I know I experience worthlessness, and now you're judging worthlessness and shame. You're judging yourself for having shame and being worthless. It's always this like level where you have to work through. That's why it's so challenging and difficult as well. And we have to acknowledge that it's just hard to work through those things.
So if you had to put your needs first, would you feel guilty about that?
I guess it depends on the situation, but I wouldn't feel a sense of guilt. It wouldn't register as guilt. But yeah, I might feel a sense of, it really depends on the situation, who's the person and everything. But yeah, I might judge myself for not having done enough, or, especially, when you see someone who might need your help and don't really have other resources, and you just can't, like, you have no more resources, you're just exhausted, there's nothing you can do. Like for people who maybe been through really severe burnout, there's those kind of experience where there's just, you cannot lift a finger to help someone. It's just you're just going to drown if you do anything, and that's very hard to go through, because you're like, you really want to help the person, and then and you might judge yourself for not being able to help.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that you always come from the perspective of of love, always coming from the perspective of wanting to help somebody else. Before we get to some of the comments, I mean, just throwing the question to Amerie, do you feel
Yeah, there's
guilty
good comments.
if you put your needs first?
Of course. You know me. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just like a bit of an automatic reflex, my emotional reflex, right? To kind of feel guilty. But of course, then you have to put a pause and go, okay, let's think about it logically. Is there anything I really need to feel really bad about, or is this going to be for the greater good in the long run? Yeah. So this is kind of how I work through that very sort of reflex guilt I'll feel.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think what Nico said earlier, I mean, when we're talking about it, this idea of acceptance, right? Emotional acceptance, I think it's a huge part of self love. I think just kind of going on a bit of a tangent. Sometimes there is this huge pressure for all of us to feel like we should be happy, we should be positive about ourselves, right? Like when we think about this idea of body positivity, we have to love our bodies, no matter how we feel that day or what sort of flaw there is. There's this sense of pressure, right, that comes with those concepts, and it could be quite you know I would say stressful for people to think about these concepts that way, because when we think about love, it's actually with more ease, with more softness, with more acceptance that we sort of approach ourselves, as opposed to we must, no matter how we present that day, we must love ourselves, and if we don't, then something is wrong with us, right? Suddenly that goes into opposition with what the premise uh, uh, should be at the start. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Let's firstly thank everyone else who's still listening to us right now. Hello. Welcome to the second episode of our new podcast. It's really nice to have all of you join us. Thanks for everyone who has left comments. Amit, Raymond, Gabriel, and Gabe actually has a comment, right? Gabe says, "You're your worst critic." It's always been that way. Yeah. And I mean, it reminds me of the time when, we were always, when I was training very hard in the national team as a junior for squash, there was always this pressure to become better, right? And one of the things that we were always taught to become better, how to become better, is actually to watch yourself. Because but things that when you watch yourself, you're very critical of everything you do. Oh, that's not right. Oh, that's not right. How come you moved wrong here? How come you chose a wrong shot? And it sometimes takes another person to actually give you a different perspective and say, you're actually not that bad, right? In fact, you perform quite well. There are just a few things that you have to work on, right? Do you find that you're your worst critic, Nico?
Yeah, I think it's universally acknowledged truth that we really are so hard on ourselves. Yeah, I think it's but then again, yes, that's the case. I think that's the case. But I think it's not because, so there's the aspect whereby, sure, so it's us watching ourselves. And I think that's exactly the experience. I mean, it's really that the thing of just constantly monitoring where we're at, like how we're doing, and oh, that sucked, and that's kind of like that's very tiring. But I feel the thing as well is that it's also not just us, in the sense that those standards we use to judge ourselves, they come from somewhere, and often they come from outside. And there are environments that can put into our head certain standards that just cannot be met, or certain person that can put into our head standards that cannot be met and can never be met, can never be met by anyone, and that we internalize as being really achievable when they're not, and use that to guide our performance and our work when it just makes no sense. And I feel like when someone, as you said, comes out and is like, I think, relax, I think you're really doing great. Like, just stop putting so much pressure on yourself. It works because, sure, some of that pressure comes from us, but also comes from outside. And I think having someone from outside telling you you're doing fine kind of like ease off some of that outside pressure. You see what I mean? We kind of like somehow internalize that pressure, not realizing that sometimes it's outside. And I think, yeah, having that kind of like discordant voice from outside that says, no, you're doing fine, is really helpful there, I feel.
I find that to be very helpful, actually, once in a while. And the other part of it, and admittedly, is I ask myself, and it's how you say it, it's like, oh, you're telling me that I'm doing okay. You're telling me to slow down. Is it because your standards are different from my standards? And it's, for me, it's like an internal debate, right? Because they share that from a very kind perspective, and maybe they genuinely feel that way. But one of the things that, like, for me, has brought me whatever little success I've had is it's always telling myself, like, never being satisfied. Correct. There is always something better I can do. There's always something more that I can achieve. If I have helped a few hundred students, why can't I help another few hundred more? Right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it's really valid and normal. I think we all have that, like, the need to really achieve. And also, I feel we can ask that question, what's the risk? What risk is there in lowering our standards? Or just maybe not lowering, but even just trying to pause and just assess, like, are they too high? Because we don't do that easily, right? It's we feel there's something deeply threatening in trying to, like, reevaluate our standards and because ultimately these are also the things that make it hard to care for self.
Reevaluating the standards.
What's the thread? Why is it so hard for us to do it?
For me, it's regret, right? Like I'm worried that if I do a little bit less now, then what would I be missing out on in the, in terms of success in the future, whatever success means, right? Or impact, for example, right? And it's like, the follow-up question to that is where will this ever end?
Exactly. Because you want to have infinitely high impact, right? You want to just save everyone, or do the best possible, which are totally valid goals, right?
But you see, the worry is that the moment you slow down, the moment you lower your standards, you stop putting yourself in the position of being able to achieve what everyone else has not been able to achieve. Right. And
so Sean, you're saying that slowing down, seems to be quite synonymous with lowering your standards, right?
It feels that way, right? I mean, it's always now, I mean, I can take it in a slightly different perspective, but this work is still pretty intense, right? So, the difference between what I can do and what somebody else can do is because when they were resting, I did a little bit more work. Last time, I became a better squash player because when everyone was resting, I was sprinting on the track and killing myself there. But when it came to the point where I had to perform, I performed. Right? That's the maybe the challenge for me is because that's the way I've achieved whatever I've wanted to achieve, right? If I've run 1 extra hour a day, in 1 month, I run 30 extra hours compared to you. In some way, I'll be better.
But how sustainable is that? Right?
That's the problem, right? Yeah, at some point, you get exhausted. Okay. Let's answer some of the comments, shall we?
Yeah.
Hi, Shaiful. Shaiful says, then it should be, what is your definition of your happiness? Let's take that question. What what does happiness mean to you, or maybe what are some things you do that make you feel happy and contented? Who wants to go first?
These
It's a,
are big questions, right?
it's really a small question. This
No, it's not. It's not small
I don't think
no,
it's
at
a
it's
small
all.
not.
Yeah,
question.
I know.
No, it's not. It's not.
I mean, I
But
actually. Okay, Nico, you want to go? You can go then.
no, go ahead. I've talked a lot.
Emery?
I think that being happy and being contented are very different things, right? I see happiness as a very transient feeling, right? And I think there is a lot of pressure these days to be happy as if being sad is a bad thing. But at the end of the day, happy, sad, angry, fear, like these different emotions, they're all transient. And being contented is a little bit deeper than just
Yeah.
a transient feeling. I think it's a deeper sense of fulfillment. And, you could get that deep sense of fulfillment even when your day is full of happiness, sadness, anger, fear, right? It's a bit more stable, I would say, than just the transient feelings that or emotions you might experience across the course of a day.
So being contented goes on a much deeper level than just being happy.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. Nico, what do you think?
I'm not exactly sure what I think, but because I think I think it really depends. Sorry, but it really depends on your definition of happiness. But I think in our common way of looking at it, yes, I think there are different things. But I'm wondering whether they're not somehow the same. So in the sense, like, what? Because okay, so to me, contentment is that sense. To me, contentment is almost not. It doesn't have to be dependent on what you do or what you achieve. Like, I feel you can be contented in any kind of like material circumstances, assuming you have, the basics needs covered.
Yeah, regardless of those
Yeah.
variables.
So it's more that sense. It almost would come out of a sense of like, oh, it's just great to be here, be with, in a place that you're okay with, be with the people you like, you love. And just almost for some people, it could just be as simple as it's just nice to exist. Like there's really nothing I have to do to get in touch with that sense of like, it's okay, and it's there's pleasure in that, and it's there's contentment in that. And I'm wondering whether sometimes the kind of things that I don't know, like I'm wondering when you chase a goal, when you're trying to achieve something, whether we actually not doing that. Sure, there's the high of like having a success, for instance. But then after the high, which we might call happiness, for instance, I think it's contentment. And it's the sense that's like, I've done everything I had to do and it worked out.
Or it didn't
And we
work
just
out.
kind of like, yeah, you get what I mean? But in a sense, like the fact that we've done everything we have to do and it worked out, kind of get the pressure, we put ourselves out of the way. And then we see, oh, and we're content now. But actually contentness was there throughout if we just had paused and spend some time to focus on it. You get what I mean? There's that sense. It's like the fact that we're succeeding just allow us to rest, relax, pause, and enjoy the contentment. But if we could allow ourselves to do it at any time, it would be easily accessible as well. Maybe.
I was looking at the definition of content on Google, and it says in a state of peaceful happiness. Would you say that if you're content, you're generally more peaceful, emotionally, psychologically? What do you think?
To me, yeah. For me, it's that sense of like peace. Well, I think it's a personal experience, but there's that sense of like peace, it's just relaxation. Like you can relax in whatever is around you, whatever's going on, and you feel no pressure to do anything to make things different. Like you feel no pressure to be different yourself, to be better, to be. To me, that's what it is. Like it's the sense of like deep relaxation.
Okay. All right.
I agree.
Okay. I'm going to throw you a question, Amerie. This comes from one of the comments from Gabriel. Would you rather be happy or contented then?
I think contentment is a lot more, I would say it would be less transient, right? If I go with what I was talking about earlier, being happy is a bonus, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be happy? But then again, we don't need to, strive for happiness every single moment or every single second, because the pursuit of happiness can be quite, again, like what I said earlier, pressurizing. And with this sense of, contentment or peace, right, underneath, you realize that, regardless of what your experiences are, at the end of the day, you're still okay with yourself, right? You're still cool with yourself. And, you acknowledge that you have done your best. You're contented, right? It also makes you more able to deal with all the different emotions that come up for you in the day. It makes you more resilient. Yeah. So contentment is, I guess, maybe a better experience to have.
It's one of those things that might surface towards, like at some point in time after a major event, for example, has happened, or a major incident has happened, right? At the end of it, you might feel like crazily happy or crazily sad. And it's some time after that when things slow down a little bit, that you look at it from a different perspective. You take a step back and you kind of look at it in a different way, right? That's where I feel sometimes the contentment actually happens, and that feeling seems to be the more lasting feeling for me.
It kind of like when the dust settles, right? Like what's left, what's underneath of the feelings. Yeah.
Shaiful has a comment earlier, and he said, it's good to slow down rather than speeding up and wrecking everything. Yep, right.
Absolutely.
Yep. And also another comment he says that different people have different builds and mental resilience. Not all have the same anatomy and build. No one is perfect. Yeah, and I think it's pretty much true. No one is perfect. It's maybe the difference between some people is they try like absolute best and do everything that they possibly can or cannot to try to be that as perfect as they can be. Right. And Nico.
Yeah. And so sorry. Yeah. But I was wondering, because I was thinking about how, so there's this thing about around like happiness, and so it's a pursuit for a reason, meaning it's like it's driven, there's a goal to achieve, and you watch yourself and you're monitoring yourself. And I feel like with contentment, so there's a sense of relaxation, but I feel that's also a skill. So I remember that story that someone told me who was training for competitive skiing in Switzerland. So it's someone who just had been on ski since like he was 5, so growing up in Switzerland and everything. And so he had a very high level in skiing. And then so he did many competitions, and he was like really on the verge of becoming one of the national champions. And then we had a discussion, and I asked him, and he said, but I stopped because I realized I could never beat the best ones. So I assumed that he felt he was technically not good enough. And he explained to me that no, that was not the issue. The issue is like we were at that level, we all technically at the same level. Like there's no question. You're not at that level if your technique is not basically perfect. He said, but the thing that those guys had that had never managed to have is like as they were competing, they weren't checking themselves. Like they weren't watching themselves. They were just in the flow. They were just going through the moves, and they weren't trying to perform, and they just had that trust that they could perform. And he said, for me, I was always watching my technique, how I'm going to negotiate that turn, how I'm going to do that, and that's really what was holding back at that level of competition.
Wow.
And to me, that kind of skill of just like letting go and relaxing in the flow, that's what brings you to a place of contentment. And that's a skill, apparently, since that's something he thought he was lacking. Yeah.
Yeah, Gabe has a comment. He says, to me, being happy is having a very good meal once, to experience the pleasure of really good food. Being contented is knowing you will have 3 so-so meals a day, but it's okay. Yep. So people have different definitions of contentment. Yeah. And he says, could contentment be translated to giving up? What do you
No, I
think?
don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's it's quite different. Being content is, I mean, this idea of peace is actually quite neutral, whereas this idea of giving up is almost like it's fueled by frustration, a sense of hopelessness, pointlessness, and futility. Yeah, so it's a bit different, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends really what you mean by giving up. So of course, when you hear giving up, you're like, yeah, you're settling or you're giving up on your goals and so on. But if you think about, there's also an element of letting go, and I think most people would consider sometimes letting go to be a good thing.
Yeah,
So
letting
I
go
think
will be
there's those,
different, yes.
right? Yeah. So there's those two aspects. So in giving up, sometimes there's an element of letting go, meaning like when you tried everything you could try and there's really nothing else you could do, you would leave it as giving up. And sometimes doing that might bring you to a place of peace. We're like, okay, that's where I'm at, and I think when you realize that, it's also a place where you can find maybe contentment there, like after you've given up. But I think it's hard because there's both that positive aspect of letting go and a negative aspect of not trying hard enough, not also knowing your potential sometimes, at work or in the way you deal with your friends or
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? I mean, we're going to semantics here, giving up and letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Giving up sounds like the ball is not in your court. I mean, it's more determined by something external. Um, whereas letting go puts you in a position where you actually had that choice to make that decision. I don't know, but that's just how I understand these two concepts.
No, well, sometimes
Yes.
letting go and making the decision to let go provides a very different feeling, right? Because there's self-empowerment. It's a choice.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
empowerment.
and letting go does not mean that you've actually like given up in the sense that it's a very more
It's more disempowering.
it's more disempowering. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah, Nico.
yeah, but I think it's still interesting in the sense, but sometimes life is disempowering in a sense, like when you have no sense of control. I don't know. Yeah. Like there's situations that are just overwhelming. And some people will see that, meaning like there's nothing, no one could do something about it that would be helpful. Like for instance, when facing maybe some certain hardship, like or difficult diagnosis, or there's things that we just cannot. They're unmanageable, literally. You cannot,
Yeah.
get a handle on it. And I'm more, and it's, I don't know. I feel there's like it's a hard thing to negotiate. Like where should you? Like, is that possible to just give up, or let go without a sense of like giving up sometime?
Yeah, I mean, let's go with the
Like,
idea
is
of
it because it's
that
not easy to let go,
illness.
right? So in a sense, like, I think it's hard to let go.
Yeah, I mean, just you were
Like, I
talking
mean,
about
do
that.
we let go sometimes without feeling that we're giving up? I guess that's the question I'm asking. I'm wondering, is it even possible to really genuinely feel, oh, I'm just letting go. I see clearly that there's nothing I can do. Or I think there's always that flavor of like, oh, I'm failing a bit. Like, I don't have a choice. There's always, I feel we have to be pushed there sometimes, no? What do you guys think?
Emery?
Yeah. So I was trying to say that you talked about, say, having an illness or maybe, like a chronic disease, say you're trying to fight, right? And giving up would be saying, okay, I don't want to have any more of these treatments. I'm done with it. Okay, I resign. But letting go could be this idea of, letting go of expectations and just really going with the flow and see how it pans out. But you're not really giving up. We're trying maybe with the treatment, right? But we're letting go of expectations. We're letting go of, being in control of what's going to happen next. Yeah. So I don't see it as, like, mutually exclusive. I think, you can, let go of expectations and yet not be giving up on something, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sean, what do you think?
No, I see. I mean, I think my overall sense. I mean, the overall opinion that I take is, I like to feel self-empowered. I think, and when I make a decision, sometimes might not be like the happiest kind of decision, But when I make something, and I know that I can make the choice, I did make the choice, I knowingly make the choice. That gives me a sense of peace. That gives me a sense of contentment. No matter whether it's choosing to give up, letting go, or moving ahead with something. And I think that feeling of self-empowerment is very important. Gives me clarity, gives me a peace of mind. Just overall being happier, I would say. Yeah. Let's look at one final comment from Gabe. And it says, I've been trying to be happy in my job for 18 years, where happiness were promotions and whatnot. I recently decided to shift focus to me, and I felt contentment, where the only person I needed to please was myself. And truth be told, it was a sense of peace. Right? And I think that sometimes when so much of our work centers on what we can do for someone else, learning to cope with the expectations of everyone around us, and always, if you are not ambitious in some way, people say that you're just slack, right? Which is not a nice connotation. Sometimes it's just learning to understand yourself, learning to appreciate yourself, and do something for yourself, right? And that comes to the point of what is important to you. Yeah, it's always like what's important to somebody else and how you can fulfill that need, right? But I don't think we spend a lot of time asking ourselves what's important to us. Yeah.
I feel maybe we should, because their empowerment there. So to me, what I'm seeing in that experience is really that sense of like, it's instead of following like outside standards in terms of what you should do, how you should perform, what's good for yourself. You work in an industry for some time, you get a pretty good sense of what good job is, and you don't need at some point outside pressure to outside people or outside structure to set pressure on you and set standards on you. And I think there's empowerment there when you reach a place where you like actually become clear your values and your standards, and you're like, these are my standards. I know what they are good standards, and I'm meeting them. And so you really don't, and whatever others might be saying about how you perform then will become largely irrelevant in a sense.
Okay.
Of course, you can still get input from people you trust and so on, if you feel that there's a need to. But in terms of like background, culture, or like expectations, I think you disconnect yourself from that, and you're like, no, I can set my own standards for myself.
Okay. Nice. So let's go on to a more personal question, I would say. If you were to do some like on the spot reflection, what would you feel are some things you need to be more at peace with yourself? Emery, you want to go first?
I think just just really learning to be okay with saying no
Mhm.
and be okay with, self-care. And yeah, just continuing to show up and give my 100%, and at the same time, you know, remembering to take breaks. I mean, it sounds really simple, but I think sometimes, in the midst of trying to do your best, you forget the simple things, like even taking a breath. Sometimes I notice myself in the middle of the day just holding my breath because I've been so busy, or like I realize I haven't had my water, something simple like that. I forget. And so it's just really remembering to, you know, slow down a little bit, remember these little things, right? Know it's okay. Um, yeah, so that I can at the end of the day tell myself, hey, you know what? I had got my own back today. No matter how busy it was, at least I still had me. So good on me. Yeah.
Thanks, Nico. What's some things you need to do to, or you feel you need to do to be more at peace with yourself?
Yeah. I think just giving myself more attention, like in a sense, having moments where I remind myself instead of having my attention focused like outwards, just cause, just screen time, like whether it's like scrolling mindlessly or Instagram or like, working on Excel spreadsheets or whatever that might look like, having moments of pause where I'm like remind myself to just check how am I feeling, like, and I can go from like look emotionally or like does that to just physically what is my posture like, because sometimes I'll be sitting at a computer and don't realize I have pain because I have my legs in weird position until like 2 hours have passed. Just ridiculous things, like we should be paying attention to, or at least I should be paying attention to. Just checking those, and even more long-term stuff, like does their work still make sense? We discuss it, like what kind of standards am I working at? Are they okay? Do they need to be improved? So that aspect of just checking with myself, and also when I'm with others, in a sense like, oh, that person pisses me off, that person is awesome, that person, when I do that, I have those strong emotions. Just check with myself, like why am I pissed off? How do I feel? And I feel that's helpful. Yeah. But it's hard to do. It's
Yeah.
really just really reminders. It's just endless. It's yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking about what you said, Nico, and I was thinking about the Maslow's hierarchy. And I was like, man, I just even have to get, I'm just looking at the basic needs part, because sometimes when you're so busy, you're not even there. And it's really hard to then
Yeah.
go up to this whole idea of emotional stuff or like self-actualization. Yeah. I'm still at basic needs for self-care. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think for myself, it's largely about making it a point to ask myself what are my own needs, what's important to me. I think it's relatively easy for me to think of other people. It's relatively easy for me to think that I work and I do a lot of things for someone, but it's just more difficult to ask myself the question, right? What do I really want? And after 30 plus years, you kind of realize that, hey, I actually don't really know what I want anymore. It's
More
all
sleep, Sean. More sleep.
right. Mostly don't really know.
More sleep.
More sleep or me? More sleep?
You.
Oh, you
yeah.
mean sleep helps? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Basic needs,
Okay.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I suppose. Fair enough. Yeah.
One
No,
of
we don't
the
want to
very
sleep. It's time wasted.
Yeah,
No.
right. Last time my friends told me sleep is for the weak. And when I spoke to when I was talking to one of the very successful professional speakers, and he says, at sometimes when I'm really, really stressed and I don't really know what to do and I'm so tired, I'm exhausted, but yet I have to get things done, I just go to sleep. And when I wake up with a clearer mind, he said, you'll be surprised at what you can do when you have a clear mind and you feel recharged, right? Your productivity, your pace of work, it's so much better. You're so much more focused. And I was like, okay. So sleeping is actually not just for the weak. Yeah. And Shaifu says he plays online games and then he'll be okay. Yeah. I
Yeah,
play.
that's great.
Yeah, I play games. And I feel okay as long as I'm winning. Okay, guys,
Fair enough.
we've spoken for about an hour, so I think let's end this off with one final question. It's a very common question that at least I ask a lot of my clients, and we ask this question a lot when we talk about self love and self care programs. And what's something you can be grateful for? What are you grateful for in your life? Right,
Is it me first?
I'll go first.
Nice.
I'm
Grateful
so
for
glad.
that,
I was.
Sean.
um, I think I'm most grateful that for whatever I'm going through or have been through, um, I'm I'm in the position to be able to make a difference in for someone else. Right? Some days I might feel really, really tired. Some days I might feel exhausted. Not every day is a good day, but whether it is my work in mental health, whether it's my work in the pharmacy, whether it's my work in Shoppa, which is our retail startup in Vietnam, and now also considering whether it is me taking care of myself, I'm actually in the position to be able to do that. I actually have the choice, and I think I need to make that choice, right? To take care more of myself, and I'm grateful that I'm in the position to be able to do that. Yeah, so that's very nice and very comforting for me. Who wants to go next?
I go.
All right, Nico.
Even though I don't have. No, the thing that came to mind is that I'm grateful that I don't know. I'm grateful that there's those moments where I can be grateful. Like
Very
I don't
meta.
know how to say that, but there's those moments that sometimes like maybe you might be walking somewhere, or you be with friends, or you be in nature, or you're doing your favorite sport, whatever that might look like. And while you're doing those activities, there are those moments where you actually realize that, hey, that's actually great. You kind of look around and it's like, yeah, I'm glad I'm here. So those moments, I wish I had more of them. But I'm grateful for the fact that they exist. Yeah, those moments of contentment, maybe gratefulness.
Nice.
But that's what came up first. But of course, yeah, I'm grateful for the fact that in terms of material circumstances, I'm okay. That's already a lot. So
yeah, and I think
yeah.
that's what a lot of other people would wish for as well, right? So it's important that we recognize what we have and be grateful for that, right? Emery, what are some things you're grateful for?
Definitely my friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys are listening, thank you. And I am very grateful that I'm in a position to give. I think that's really one thing I
Yeah,
wake up to every day and feel really grateful for, because to be able to give, I think is, you know, yeah, I feel like it's really a privilege to be able to do that. Um, yeah, and I know a lot of people are really struggling, in this current sort of climate, and to be able to sort of show up for work, right? I think it's really it's really something, right? I'm really grateful that at least um, I'm still able to help people. I'm still able to give, right? I don't have to worry too much about you know um, some of these things, right, that others might be struggling with. So I mean, yeah, I think every day being able to work is really just something I'm really grateful for. Mm.
nice. Thank you. And we are grateful for everyone who is here joining us. Thank you so much. I say it's a privilege for us to be here and have this conversation and chat with all of you. Thank you for everyone who's left a comment. Gabe, he says he's grateful for everyone here in this chat. Thank you so much. Thank you. Cynthia says, find me. Awesome. Oh, thank you for joining us. Thanks, Chai-Fu, for all your comments. So our topic this week was on self-love. Next week, I think we're going to carry on the topic of love, but this time we are going on to a different kind of love.
I wonder what.
I wonder what. Yeah. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining us. Next week, we are going to, next week or 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, we are going to talk about romantic love, relationships kind of love. Right? Maybe not just romantic, right? But in terms of interpersonal kinds of love. Lena is here as well. Hi, Lena. Oh, you're all joining at the time when we are concluding. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's been a pleasure having this conversation. And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Don't forget to follow our page on YouTube. Don't forget to follow our page on, it's called On the Inside Podcast. You might see this on my personal page right now, but we're eventually going to shift it only to the On the Inside Podcast. All right, so I'll leave the name of the podcast or a link when this is over. Please join us and follow us. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Have a good morning. Have a good afternoon, wherever you are. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.